Hubby called me pathetic and said he was leaving me when I gave him a photo album. Until he saw page 10. What would you do if, after 18 years of marriage, your husband looked you in the eye, laughed at your anniversary gift, and then told you he was leaving for another woman? That's exactly what happened to me. But what he didn't know, I had a secret of my own. While he was sneaking around betraying me, I was quietly planning the ultimate revenge. And when I finally revealed it, his entire world crumbled in ways he never saw coming. You won't believe how this ends, so stick around. Because trust me, you do not want to miss this. I always believed in love stories. Not the fairy tale kind, but the kind where two people build a life together, through the highs and the lows, through sickness and health, through every mundane Tuesday night and every special anniversary. I thought I had that with Elliot. 18 years of marriage, a home filled with memories, a life that on the surface looked picture perfect. But the thing about illusions is, once you see the cracks, you can never unsee them. And that night, the night of our anniversary, the cracks weren't just visible, they shattered completely. I had spent weeks putting together that scrapbook, carefully selecting the photos, the little notes we had written to each other over the years, ticket stubs from concerts, postcards from our vacations. It was a timeline of our love, a testament to everything we had built. I wanted it to remind him of us, of what we had, of why we mattered. I wrapped it in silver paper, set the dining table with the good china, lit the candles. The reservation at La Belle Maison, the French restaurant we always went to on special occasions, was set for 7:30 p.m. I even wore the navy blue dress he used to say made my eyes shine. I had convinced myself that whatever distance had crept between us, whatever coldness I had felt from him in the past year, this would fix it. Then he walked in. No smile, no flowers, no acknowledgement that it was our anniversary at all. Just a tired sigh and the sharp scent of cologne I didn't recognize clinging to his shirt. He tossed his keys on the counter, loosened his tie, and barely glanced at the table. What's all this? His voice held no warmth, just irritation. I swallowed, forcing a smile. Happy anniversary. He stared at me for a beat, then let out a dry chuckle, shaking his head. Jesus, Celeste. He ran a hand through his dark hair, exhaling sharply. I can't do this anymore. The air left my lungs. Do what? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he walked past me, his eyes finally landing on the wrapped gift sitting on his place setting. He peeled the paper off with the same indifference someone might unwrap a cheap office, Secret Santa gift. When he realized what it was, he laughed a short, cruel sound. A scrapbook? Really? He flipped through it carelessly, bending the pages, not even stopping to take in the photos. 18 years of marriage, and this is what you give me? A pathetic little book? I felt the heat rise in my face, my throat tightening. But before I could say anything, he shut the album with a snap and tossed it onto the table like it meant nothing. Then, with the same detached expression, he delivered the real blow. Since we're being honest, he said, adjusting the cuff of his expensive watch, I have been seeing Vanessa for the past year. My ears started ringing. I gripped the back of the chair to steady myself. Vanessa, his assistant. The one I had suspected but never wanted to believe. She was young, early 30s at most, with blonde hair and legs that went on for days. And now, my husband, the man I had built a life with, was confirming what I had tried to push out of my mind for months. He continued, as if he were talking about switching to a different cable provider. She's exciting, ambitious, everything you used to be, and I'm leaving you tonight. He gestured toward the door, and that's when I noticed the suitcase by the entrance. A cold numbness spread through me. You're leaving tonight? Yeah. He glanced at his watch. She's waiting for me downstairs. We'll be staying at the Grand Regent for a while until we get our own place. I'll have my lawyer contact you about the house and assets. He exhaled, shaking his head like I was some pitiful woman he had to deal with. Let's not make this messy, Celeste. Just sign the papers when they come. I'll make sure you're taken care of. He was already checked out, already gone. He had probably packed that suitcase days ago, maybe even weeks. Had he been waiting for the right moment? Or had he simply stopped caring whether or not I would break? I straightened my spine, willing myself not to let him see how badly I was unraveling inside. My hands trembled as I reached for the scrapbook, running my fingers along the worn edges of our life together. When I finally spoke, my voice was eerily calm. You're right about one thing, Elliot. His brows lifted slightly, waiting. This evening isn't going as planned. I pulled the album from his grasp, my grip tightening around it. What he didn't know, what he would never have suspected, was that between these carefully arranged pages lay something far more valuable than sentiment, something that would change everything. A week ago, in the quiet hours of the night, I had checked and rechecked those numbers on my lottery ticket. 6 numbers that transformed me from an aging, abandoned wife into a multi-millionaire. I had sat at our kitchen table, my breath caught in my chest, staring at the confirmation screen on my laptop. $85 million. The first person I called wasn't Elliot. It was Charlotte Davis, the most respected financial advisor in Austin. Within days, we had locked everything down. Every cent was secured, legally untouchable by anyone but me. I had already set things in motion. I had already started looking at properties in Malibu, picturing a life far away from this house, from this man, from the hollow shell of a marriage I had been clinging to for far too long. So as I stood there, watching my soon-to-be ex-husband smirk at me, so sure of his power, so certain that he had won, I felt something unexpected relief. I smoothed my dress, the one he once said, made my curves look elegant, but now made me feel like a woman reborn. My pulse steadied, my vision cleared, and for the first time in years I saw Elliot exactly as he was, not the man I had loved, not the man I had promised forever to, just another man who thought he could trade in his wife like an outdated model. I met his gaze, my lips curving into the smallest, most knowing smile. Go, Elliot. Vanessa's waiting. He gave a slow nod as if dismissing me one last time, then grabbed his suitcase and walked out the door. The moment it clicked shut, I exhaled a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. And then, for the first time all night, I laughed. Not out of joy, not out of pain, but because Elliot had no idea. He thought he had left me behind. He had no idea I was the one who had already left him first. I stood in the middle of my living room, the silence pressing in on me like a suffocating weight. The door had barely clicked shut behind Elliot, and already the house felt emptier. Not just in the physical sense, but in the way it had for months, like I had been living with a ghost, a man who had checked out long before he packed that suitcase. I ran a hand over the spine of the scrapbook, my fingers grazing the worn leather cover, my mind replaying the moment he had dismissed it. Dismissed me, as if 18 years together meant nothing. The anger that simmered beneath my skin was sharp, but beneath that, something colder settled inside me. Resignation. Clarity. Elliot thought he had won. He thought he had the upper hand, walking out with his smug grin and his younger mistress waiting for him in the car downstairs. He thought I would crumble, that I would beg, that I would be shattered, sitting in the dark, waiting for the divorce papers to arrive. Heartbroken and alone, he had no idea that I had been waiting for this moment. I took a deep breath and crossed the room to the sleek mahogany desk Elliot had insisted on buying last year, a purchase that had sent us further into debt, though he had always assured me his investments would pay off soon. I slid open the drawer, retrieving the thick envelope that had been sitting there for days, ready. My hands were steady now, my heart no longer racing with shock or grief. Because I wasn't grieving, I was preparing. I pulled out the contents documents detailing every step I had taken in the last week, every precaution, every legal safeguard. Charlotte, my financial advisor, had been thorough. Every cent of my lottery winnings was locked away in a private trust, my accounts secured under an ironclad legal team. Elliot, for all his arrogance, had no idea that while he had been planning his new life with Vanessa, I had been planning mine. The difference was, mine wasn't built on lies. The thought of Elliot and Vanessa holed up in some luxury hotel, sipping champagne and laughing at my expense, made my stomach churn. I could almost hear her voice, sickly sweet, pretending to be sympathetic. She must be devastated, baby. You were her whole world. I could picture Elliot, shaking his head, a self-satisfied smirk on his face as he reassured her. Celeste will sign whatever I put in front of her. She's too weak to fight back. The thing about men like Elliot, they believe their own lies. They convince themselves that just because a woman is loyal, she must be foolish. That just because she is kind, she must be weak. That just because she doesn't fight dirty, she doesn't know how to fight at all. I turned on my laptop, the glow from the screen illuminating the dimly lit room. My email inbox was already filled with updates, documents from Charlotte, confirmations from my lawyers, real estate listings in Malibu waiting for my approval. I had spent years tied to Elliot's decisions, his failures, his manipulations. But now I was the one in control. I clicked open the most recent message from my lawyer, skimming the details once more. The house, the one Elliot assumed he would negotiate for in the divorce, was already in my name alone. The prenuptial agreement, the one he had arrogantly dismissed as standard paperwork when we got married, would ensure that he wouldn't see a dime of my money. The financial records, the ones proving his reckless spending, his gambling debts, his secret withdrawals, those were all compiled neatly, ready to be presented if he dared to challenge me. My eyes flickered to the clock, 9:45 p.m. He and Vanessa were probably celebrating by now, toasting to their so-called victory. I smiled to myself, shaking my head. Let him have this moment. Let him believe he's won. I reached for my phone, scrolling through my contacts until I landed on Charlotte's name. I hesitated for only a second before pressing call. She answered on the second ring. Celeste, how are you holding up? I let out a slow breath, my fingers tapping against the desk. Better than expected. There was a pause. It happened, didn't it? I let out a dry laugh. Oh yeah. Right on cue. He packed his bags, confessed to the affair, and walked out like he was doing me a favor. Charlotte exhaled sharply. Bastard. I smiled. Despite everything, you should have seen him. He actually thought he was in control. That I'd be sitting here crying, waiting for him to throw me scraps. Let me guess, she said, her voice laced with amusement. He told you he'd take care of you. I laughed, shaking my head. Word for word. Charlotte made a disgusted noise. Men like that, they never see it coming, do they? No, I murmured, glancing back at the stack of documents. They really don't. There was a brief silence, then Charlotte's tone softened. Do you need me to do anything? I glanced at the unopened bottle of wine on the counter, the one I had planned to open tonight, to celebrate our anniversary. It would taste much better when I toasted to my freedom instead. No, I said, a slow smile spreading across my lips. Everything's already in motion. We ended the call, and I sat there for a moment, staring at the city's skyline beyond the window. Austin had been my home for years, but suddenly, it felt like a cage I had finally found the key to. My gaze flickered back to the scrapbook on the table, to the pages filled with memories that no longer felt like mine. I stood, crossing the room, flipping open the cover once more. Nestled between the photographs, right where I had hidden it, was the letter, the official confirmation of my winnings from the Texas Lottery Commission. The numbers were bold, unchangeable. $85 million. I traced the ink with my fingertips, my chest rising and falling in steady rhythm. The future stretched before me, limitless, unburdened. And Elliot? He was just another mistake I was finally walking away from. A sharp buzz from my phone snapped me out of my thoughts. I glanced at the screen. An unknown number. My stomach clenched, but I answered. A woman's voice came through the line, hesitant, almost nervous. Miss S. Monroe? I frowned. Who is this? A pause. Then my name is Lisa Carter. I work with Elliot. Or, I did. I straightened. Okay? Another hesitation. Then, in a lower voice, she said, I think you should know he's been hiding something. And it's bigger than an affair. My blood ran cold. What do you mean? Lisa exhaled shakily. I don't know the full details, but there's money missing from his company, large amounts. And I heard something today, something about offshore accounts. A slow, pulsing beat filled my ears. My fingers tightened around the phone. Miss S. Monroe, I think he's been embezzling money. A lot of it. For a moment, I didn't speak. I barely breathed. Then, as the weight of her words settled in, something inside me shifted. I had thought Elliot's betrayal ended with Vanessa. I had been wrong. This was bigger. And Elliot Monroe had no idea just how much he had underestimated me. Elliot thought he had it all figured out. He had his mistress, his secret money, and his perfect escape plan. But what he didn't know was that I had been watching, waiting, putting together the pieces. And when I finally confronted him, let's just say the look on his face was worth every second. But here's the question, what do you think I did next? Did I expose his affair first? Or go straight for his money? Comment 111. If you think I went after his mistress. Ortwoo 22foot. If you think I destroyed his finances first. Let's see who guesses right. The moment I hung up the phone, a cold, sharp focus settled over me. Lisa's words kept playing in my head, looping over and over, each time sinking deeper into my bones. He's been hiding something. It's bigger than an affair. I should have been surprised, maybe even horrified. But instead, all I felt was clarity. Of course, Elliot wasn't just unfaithful, he was reckless, arrogant. He had spent years believing he was untouchable, believing that no matter what he did, he could talk his way out of it, manipulate his way into control. But this wasn't just about a mistress or a failed marriage. If Lisa was right, Elliot had dug himself into a hole so deep that there might not be a way out. And that was something I could use. I grabbed my laptop and sat down at the dining table, pushing the untouched anniversary dinner aside. The smell of cold steak and red wine was nauseating now, a reminder of how I had planned to spend this night celebrating a love that didn't even exist anymore. Instead, I was preparing for war. I opened my email, quickly scrolling past the legal confirmations and real estate listings. Charlotte had sent earlier until I found the contact I needed, Amanda Sterling. Amanda had been working in accounting at Elliot's firm for years, and if anyone had seen the discrepancies Lisa mentioned, it would be her. More importantly, she and I had always gotten along well. At company events, when Elliot paraded me around like a trophy, Amanda was one of the few people who spoke to me like I was a person, not just Elliot Monroe's wife. I took a breath and typed out a message. Amanda, it's Celeste. I know this is unexpected, but I need to ask you something important. Is there anything unusual happening at the firm? Something about the finances? I know it's a lot to ask, but please, if there's something I need to know, I'd appreciate your honesty. I hesitated for only a second before hitting send. I didn't have the luxury of time. If Elliot had been embezzling money, then he was already scrambling, trying to cover his tracks, maybe even planning to leave town before anyone caught on. And if that was the case, then I needed to move faster. Minutes later, my phone buzzed. I snatched it up, my pulse hammering as I saw Amanda's name on the screen. Celeste, she said, her voice tight. I was hoping you'd call. My stomach dropped. You knew? There was a beat of silence. Then, with a sigh, she said, I suspected. There were inconsistencies in the reports, money moving in and out of accounts that didn't make sense. At first, I thought it was just bad bookkeeping, but then I started digging deeper. I pressed my fingers against my temple. And I found offshore accounts, Amanda said flatly. Money being funneled through shell companies. Large amounts, Celeste. This isn't just a mistake. It's fraud. My grip on the phone tightened. I forced myself to breathe, to keep my voice steady. Does anyone else know? The board has been suspicious, but no one has proof yet, she admitted. And Elliot? He's been acting strange, jittery, like he knows something's coming. A slow smile crept onto my lips. That's because it is, Amanda hesitated. Celeste. What are you planning? I glanced at the scrapbook on the table, the one Elliot had sneered at just hours ago, the one that held the key to my next move. I'm planning, I said, standing up, feeling lighter than I had in months, to make sure Elliot finally faces the consequences of his choices. I ended the call and grabbed my keys. If Elliot thought he was going to walk away from this unscathed, he was in for a rude awakening. I had spent too many years being the quiet, supportive wife, the one who overlooked his business deals and investment strategies. But that Celeste was gone, and the woman I was now? She was ready to burn everything he had built to the ground. The moment I ended the call with Amanda, a strange sense of calm settled over me. Not the fragile, fleeting kind that comes before a breakdown, but the kind that arrives when you finally understand exactly what needs to be done. Elliot wasn't just a liar. He wasn't just a cheater. He was a criminal, and he had no idea that his entire world was about to come crashing down around him. I slipped on a jacket, grabbed my car keys, and headed out into the night. The warm Texas air clung to my skin as I slid behind the wheel, my mind already racing ahead. I wasn't just reacting anymore. I was in control. For years, Elliot had dictated the rules of our life, where we lived, how we spent our money, who we socialized with. He had controlled every aspect of our marriage, manipulating situations to suit himself while keeping me in the dark. But tonight, the tables had turned. As I pulled onto the highway, I replayed Amanda's words in my mind. Offshore accounts, shell companies, large amounts. How deep did this go? How long had he been siphoning money from his own company? And more importantly, had he really been arrogant enough to leave behind a paper trail? I tightened my grip on the steering wheel. Of course he had. Elliot had always believed himself untouchable. The rules didn't apply to him. That's why he had been so confident walking out that door tonight, so smug as he told me about Vanessa. In his mind, he had already won. I was about to prove him wrong. 20 minutes later, I pulled into the parking lot of a sleek, high-rise office building in downtown Austin. It was nearly midnight, but the lights on the 12th floor Elliot's firm were still on. Good. Someone was still working. I grabbed my purse and strode into the building, my heels clicking against the marble floor. The night guard barely looked up as I made my way to the elevators. He had seen me here before, back when I used to play the role of the dutiful wife, dropping off forgotten lunches or waiting for Elliot to finish late meetings. The familiarity worked in my favor. No questions asked. The elevator ride felt endless. My pulse thrummed in my ears as I watched the numbers tick upward, my mind running through every possible scenario. I wasn't entirely sure what I was about to find or if I'd find anything at all, but instinct told me I was on the right track. The doors slid open with a soft chime, and I stepped into the dimly lit hallway. The office was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that only exists when a place is supposed to be empty. But I wasn't alone. A soft glow spilled from the corner office, Elliot's office. I crept closer, my heart hammering. Through the glass walls, I saw a woman hunched over a desk, her fingers flying over a keyboard. Lisa. She looked up as I entered, her expression shifting from shock to relief. Celeste, she whispered, glancing around nervously. You came. I shut the door behind me. Tell me everything. Lisa hesitated, her hands wringing together. I don't know the full extent, but I've seen enough to know that something is very, very wrong. She swallowed hard. There's money missing, Celeste. Millions. And Elliot has been covering it up with fake reports and ghost accounts. I exhaled sharply, my stomach twisting. I had suspected it, but hearing the confirmation out loud made it real. Do you have proof? Lisa nodded quickly. I've been pulling files all week, trying to piece everything together. She turned her monitor toward me, and my breath caught as I scanned the screen. Transactions, wire transfers, offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. The numbers blurred together, but one thing was crystal clear. Elliot wasn't just in deep, he was drowning. I shook my head in disbelief. How long has this been going on? At least 3 years, Lisa said, her voice tight. Maybe longer. He's been shifting money around, making it look like profit, but in reality, he's bleeding the company dry. 3 years. That meant Elliot had been stealing long before Vanessa, long before our marriage even started falling apart. How had I not seen it? How had I been so blind? Lisa hesitated, then pulled up another document. And then there's this. I leaned in, my eyes scanning the screen. A contract. No, not just a contract, a deal. Between Elliot and an unnamed investor. The numbers were staggering. What is this? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Lisa hesitated. I think he was planning to leave the country. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. My mind reeled, scrambling to process what she was saying. Leaving? Elliot was planning to run? I forced myself to stay calm. Does anyone else know about this? Lisa shook her head. Not yet. But if the board finds out, they will, I said, my voice steel. Because we're going to make sure they do. Lisa's eyes widened. Celeste, if Elliot finds out what we're doing, I cut her off. Let me worry about Elliot. I grabbed my phone and took pictures of the screen, capturing every incriminating detail. Then I turned to Lisa. Email these files to me. Every single one. She hesitated, then nodded, her fingers flying over the keyboard. Moments later, my phone pinged with a new message. I straightened, my mind already calculating the next move. Elliot had spent years controlling the game, moving the pieces as he saw fit, believing he would always come out on top. He was about to learn exactly what it felt like to lose. By the time I stepped out of the office building, the night air had turned cooler, crisp against my skin. My heart was still racing, not from fear, but from something sharper, determination. The weight of what I had just uncovered sat heavy in my chest, but instead of feeling overwhelmed, I felt alive, focused. For the first time in years, I wasn't just reacting to Elliot's choices, I was controlling the narrative. He thought he had played me, thought he had gotten away clean, but he had underestimated the one thing that made me dangerous. I knew him better than he knew himself. Sliding into my car, I checked my phone. The email from Lisa sat at the top of my inbox, a neatly packaged collection of Elliot's dirty secrets, each document a nail in the coffin of his so-called empire. I clicked on the attachment, skimming through once more, my eyes landing on the offshore accounts. Cayman Islands, Debt, Switzerland, Singapore. He had been methodical, moving money across borders, covering his tracks just enough to make it look legitimate. But he had made mistakes. He had left trails. I needed to move fast. Elliot wasn't stupid. He would sense something was off soon, if he hadn't already. The moment he realized I wasn't crumbling under the weight of his betrayal, he would start asking questions. And when he did, I needed to be 3 steps ahead. I pulled out of the parking lot, gripping the wheel tighter than necessary as I merged onto the highway. My mind was running through the next moves, through every possible scenario. If Elliot was planning to leave the country, then that meant he was close, dangerously close to pulling the trigger on whatever last-minute deals he had in place. I needed to make sure he never got the chance. 20 minutes later, I parked outside my house, cutting the engine but not getting out right away. The house loomed in front of me, dark and quiet. The same house Elliot had confidently assumed he could negotiate for in the divorce. The same house where I had spent years waiting up for him, convincing myself that the late nights, the business trips, the unexplained expenses were just part of the life we had built. I wasn't waiting anymore. I grabbed my phone and dialed Charlotte. She picked up on the second ring. "Celeste," she said, her voice sharp, alert. "I was about to call you. What happened?" I let out a slow breath. "I have proof, Charlotte. He's been funneling money through offshore accounts. Millions. It's fraud, and it's bad." There was a pause. "You're sure?" I swallowed. I saw the documents myself. And there's more. He's planning to leave. I don't know when, but if we don't act fast, he's going to vanish before anyone catches him. Charlotte exhaled. All right, we can work with this. We need to get this information to the right people before he catches wind of what's happening. I leaned my head against the seat, closing my eyes for a second. The board? Yes, but not just them, she said. We need leverage. Something that makes it impossible for them to look the other way. If we take this directly to the authorities, Elliot won't just lose his job, he'll go to prison. Prison. The word settled between us, heavy and real. I had spent years imagining what justice would look like. I had pictured Elliot losing his money, his career, his reputation. I had fantasized about him realizing too late that he had gambled and lost. But prison? That was something different. That wasn't just revenge. That was permanent. Celeste? Charlotte's voice pulled me back. I blinked, straightening. I want to do it right. I don't want him to have a single way out of this. Then we don't just take this to the board, she said. We make sure this reaches the right people, the SEC, the IRS, the feds if we have to. I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. How fast can we move? I can have everything in motion by tomorrow morning, she said. But Celeste, this is going to get ugly. You need to be ready for that. I thought about Elliot's face, the smug way he had looked at me tonight, the way he had so easily dismissed me as nothing more than a loose end. He thought he had stripped me of my power, but he had no idea that I was about to burn his entire world down. I've been ready for a long time, I said. We ended the call, and I finally stepped out of the car, the weight of what was coming pressing down on me, but in the best possible way. This wasn't fear, this was momentum. I walked into the house, locking the door behind me. My fingers itched to call Elliot, to hear the moment his arrogance cracked, the moment he realized that his perfectly constructed life was seconds away from collapse. But that would come later. For now, I did the only thing I could do. I sat down at my laptop, opened the files Lisa had sent, and started putting the final pieces into place. The next morning, I woke up before the sun, my mind already racing. I had barely slept, but exhaustion was the last thing on my mind. There was too much at stake, too much to do, and for the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for someone else to make the next move. I was in control. I pulled on a blazer, something sharp and structured, a deliberate choice. I needed to look like someone Elliot would never suspect. Someone who wasn't broken. Someone who wasn't scared. Because I wasn't. Not anymore. By 7:30 a.m., I was sitting across from Charlotte in a corner booth at the Driscoll, the kind of place where politicians and old money whispered about deals over black coffee and overpriced eggs. The server barely finished pouring before Charlotte slid a thick folder across the table. I glanced at the crisp legal documents, the undeniable proof that Elliot had turned his career into a personal cash machine. It was all there, every fraudulent transfer, every offshore account, every carefully disguised theft. My fingers traced the edge of the folder as a strange kind of satisfaction curled in my chest. "Are you ready?" Charlotte asked, watching me closely. I exhaled slowly, my grip tightening around my coffee mug. "More than ready." She nodded approvingly. "I spoke to a contact at the SEC this morning. They're very interested in this. But the second we submit, there's no going back." "I don't want to go back," I said, my voice steady. Charlotte smiled, but there was something sharp in her eyes. "Good, because I have one more card to play." She pulled out her phone, swiping until she found what she was looking for, then turned the screen toward me. I stared at the image, my stomach flipping. It was a photo of Vanessa, sitting in the lobby of a law firm downtown. She looked anxious, her arms crossed tightly, her phone clutched in her hand like a lifeline. "What is this?" I asked. "A little insurance," Charlotte said, sipping her coffee. "Vanessa made an appointment with a divorce attorney 2 days ago. Not for Elliot, obviously, but because she's still legally married to someone else." I blinked. "You're kidding." "Wish I was." Charlotte slid her phone back into her bag. "She's not just Elliot's mistress. She's a liar. And if she thinks Elliot is going to keep her comfortable, she's in for a rude awakening. I let out a breath, shaking my head. The irony was almost too perfect. Elliot had thrown away 18 years of marriage for a woman who was just as deceitful as he was. Charlotte leaned in, lowering her voice. I'm guessing Vanessa doesn't know about the fraud. But if we need to push her, if we need her to talk, she'll flip on him, I finished. Charlotte smirked. Exactly. I stared at the folder in front of me, my pulse steady. Elliot had spent years making me feel like I was powerless, like I was just another piece in his carefully constructed life. But this was real power. Not the kind that comes from manipulation or lies, but the kind that comes from knowing the truth and using it. I reached for my phone and pulled up Elliot's number. My thumb hovered over the screen for a second before I hit call. It rang twice before he answered. Celeste? I smiled at how sharp his voice was, how he wasn't expecting to hear from me. Good morning, Elliot. There was a pause, then a scoff. What do you want? I leaned back, my fingers tapping against the folder. I just thought you should know you were right about one thing. Silence. Then, warily, about what? I let the moment stretch before answering. This isn't going to be messy. Another beat of silence. Celeste, I'll see you soon, I said, then ended the call before he could respond. Charlotte raised an eyebrow. Dramatic. I grinned, standing up. I learned from the best. Together, we walked out of the restaurant, the weight of the folder in my hands feeling less like a burden and more like freedom. The moment I stepped into Elliot's office, I could feel the shift in energy. The sleek, modern space he had once ruled over now felt smaller, colder. The large windows that overlooked the Austin skyline, the polished desk where he had made countless deals, the leather chair he had leaned back in. With that smug confidence, it was all still there. But the power he had once wielded in this space, that was gone, and he knew it. Elliot was standing by the window, his back to me, hands shoved into the pockets of his tailored suit. He didn't turn around when I entered, but I knew he had heard me. The tension in his shoulders gave him away. Celeste. His voice was clipped, strained. I closed the door behind me, the soft click echoing in the room. Elliot. He exhaled sharply, finally turning to face me. His eyes raked over me, searching for something: weakness, uncertainty, doubt. But he wouldn't find any of that. Not today. You're really enjoying this, aren't you? He said, his lips curling into a humorless smile. I tilted my head, pretending to consider. If you mean watching you squirm, then yes. A little. His jaw clenched. Cut the act, Celeste. Why are you here? I stepped forward, placing the thick folder onto his pristine desk. He glanced at it, then back at me, wariness flickering in his eyes. He wasn't used to not knowing the game, not being the one in control. Go ahead, I said, gesturing to it. Take a look. Elliot hesitated, then reached for the folder, flipping it open. I watched his expression shift as he scanned the documents. His brow furrowed, his grip on the paper tightened. And then, the moment of realization hit. His face drained of color. This, he muttered under his breath, flipping through page after page. Where the hell did you get this? I folded my arms across my chest. Let's just say you left a few loose ends. And I've always been good at tying things up. He looked up at me, and for the first time I saw something close to fear in his eyes. Not anger, not arrogance. Fear. Celeste, listen. Oh, I am listening, I cut in smoothly. I'm listening to how you stole millions from your own company, how you funneled money through offshore accounts hoping no one would notice, how you planned to disappear before anyone could catch up to you. I leaned in, lowering my voice just enough. And I'm especially listening to the part where you thought you could walk away from all of this and leave me with nothing. His fingers twitched, the papers rustling slightly as his hands shook. You don't understand, no, Elliot, I said, my voice like steel. You don't understand. You had it all figured out, didn't you? You thought you were the smartest guy in the room. You thought you could cheat on me, lie to me, steal from your own company, and still come out ahead. I let out a soft, humorless laugh. But you made one mistake. His breath was shallow now. And what's that? I smiled, slow and deliberate. You underestimated me. Elliot swallowed hard, his mind no doubt racing through the implications. He knew me well enough to know I wouldn't be standing here unless every move had already been set in motion. How much do you want? He asked suddenly, his voice barely above a whisper. I blinked. Then I laughed, genuinely this time. Oh, Elliot, you really think this is about money? His nostrils flared. It's always about money. Not this time, I said, shaking my head. See, I don't need your money, Elliot. I don't need anything from you. I stepped back, watching the full weight of my words settle over him. But the SEC? The IRS? The FBI? They're going to need a lot from you. He paled. Celeste, please. I held up a hand. Don't. You don't get to beg. Not after everything you've done. He moved around the desk, closing the distance between us in 2 quick steps. Celeste, if this gets out, I'll lose everything. I arched an eyebrow. I know. His hand twitched, like he wanted to grab my arm, shake some sense into me. But he didn't, because he knew better. You don't have to do this. He tried again, his voice softer now, more desperate. Think about what this will do to you, to your reputation. Do you really want to be the woman who sent her husband to prison? I smiled. I think I'll sleep just fine. His phone buzzed on the desk. He flinched. The color on the screen showed an incoming call from an unknown number. But I already knew who it was. You should answer that, I said, stepping aside. Elliot stared at me for a long moment before reluctantly picking up the phone. Hello? His voice was tight. The response on the other end was muffled, but I didn't need to hear it to know what was being said. The SEC had received the documents. They were investigating, and Elliot's perfect little world, it was crumbling. I watched as the blood drained from his face, his hand gripping the phone so tightly his knuckles turned white. He muttered something, then slowly set the phone down, exhaling shakily. You ruined me, he whispered, his voice hollow. I tilted my head. No, Elliot, you ruined yourself. I just made sure everyone saw it. For a moment, he just stood there, frozen, like a man who had seen the end of the road and knew there was no way to turn back. Then, slowly, he sank into his chair, his head in his hands. I watched him for a few seconds longer, then turned and walked toward the door. Just before stepping out, I paused, looking over my shoulder. Vanessa's going to love this, I mused, especially since she's still married. His head snapped up, his eyes wide with disbelief. I gave him one last smile before slipping out of the office, leaving him with nothing but the mess he had created. And God, it felt good. I barely heard the sound of my heels clicking against the marble floor as I walked out of Elliot's office. My heart was still hammering, but not with fear. It was something else, something colder and sharper. The adrenaline of knowing I had just pulled the rug out from under him, that the walls of his carefully constructed life were finally closing in. I had spent years feeling powerless, waiting for the other shoe to drop. But this was different. This was me taking back everything he had stolen. As I stepped into the elevator, I exhaled slowly, steadying myself. My hands weren't shaking. My voice had never wavered. I had looked Elliot in the eye, watched the panic flicker through him, seen the exact moment he realized he was cornered. He had no escape, and that was just the beginning. The doors slid shut, and I pulled out my phone, my thumb hovering over Charlotte's number. She had told me to call the second I was done. I hesitated, just for a second, letting myself savor the silence, the quiet before the final storm. Then I pressed dial. She picked up immediately. Well, it's done, I said. A pause. Then, how did he take it? I let out a slow breath, leaning against the elevator wall, like a man who just realized the house is on fire and he's locked inside. Charlotte chuckled. Good. I glanced at my reflection in the steel elevator doors. My posture was straight, my expression unreadable, but my eyes, they looked different. sharper, unapologetic. What now? I asked. Now, Charlotte said. We let the dominoes fall. I nodded to myself, ending the call just as the elevator reached the ground floor. The lobby was bright and busy, people coming and going, completely unaware that somewhere upstairs, Elliot Monroe was watching his world burn. I stepped outside, the Austin sun blazing overhead, and slipped on my sunglasses. My car was parked right where I left it, but just as I reached for the handle, my phone buzzed again. Unknown number. I knew who it was before I even answered. I took a breath and pressed the phone to my ear. Hello, Vanessa. There was silence on the other end, then a sharp intake of breath. What the hell did you do? I smirked, unlocking my car and sliding inside. Oh, Vanessa. The first thought you, of all people, would appreciate a little ambition. Her voice sharpened. Elliot just called me. He's losing his mind. He said you're trying to destroy him. I turned the ignition, the engine purring to life. I'm not trying to do anything. I already did. She cursed under her breath. You don't get it. If he goes down, so do a lot of other people. I raised an eyebrow. Ah, yes, his powerful friends. You think this is a game? She snapped. Elliot was my future, Celeste. He had plans. We had plans. I laughed, genuinely amused. Oh, honey, you were his plan. A convenient distraction. A shiny new toy. You think he was going to build a life with you? The same man who's been embezzling money and setting up offshore accounts for years? You were nothing but an accessory to his ego. Her silence stretched long enough that I knew the truth was sinking in. Here's what's going to happen, I continued. You're going to take a long, hard look at the situation you're in. You can either go down with him, or you can walk away while you still have the chance. Her voice was quieter now, hesitant. You don't know everything, Celeste. I hummed, checking my rearview mirror before pulling out of the parking lot. Maybe not, but I know enough. And so do the authorities. She sucked in a breath. Wait, are you saying... I'm saying you might want to get a lawyer, I cut in smoothly. Because the next few weeks, they're going to be very interesting for Elliot, and anyone tied to him. I heard her breath hitch. Then the line went dead. I smirked, tossing my phone onto the passenger seat. That was the thing about women like Vanessa, so sure of their place, so convinced they were different, that they were special. But at the end of the day, she was just another chess piece Elliot had tried to move. The difference was, I had already won the game. I pulled onto the highway, feeling the tension that had lived in my body for so long finally start to loosen. Elliot had spent years making me feel like I was stuck, like I had no options, like my life was tied to his decisions. But I had just rewritten the ending of this story. And for the first time in a long time, I was free. 1 year later, I stood barefoot on the balcony of my Malibu beach house, a glass of wine in hand, watching as the sun melted into the Pacific. The sky was painted in strokes of gold and crimson, waves crashing in a rhythmic pulse below. The scent of salt and freedom filled the air. My old life felt like a distant memory, something from another lifetime, another version of myself. The woman I used to be, the one who begged for Elliot's attention, who ignored the late-night meetings, who accepted every lie with quiet resignation. She didn't exist anymore. She had been replaced by someone stronger, someone who had learned that survival wasn't about endurance. It was about knowing when to walk away and when to fight back. The past year had been a storm, a whirlwind of chaos and revelations, but standing here now, I knew it had all been worth it. Elliot's world had crumbled faster than I could have imagined. The SEC investigation had unearthed everything: the offshore accounts, the fraudulent deals, the stolen money. The company had collapsed under the weight of his greed, shareholders pulling out, the board turning on him the moment they realized how deep his crimes ran. The IRS had come knocking soon after, followed closely by federal prosecutors, and just like that, Elliot Monroe, the man who once believed himself untouchable, was standing in a courtroom, his perfectly tailored suit exchanged for an orange jumpsuit, facing a 12-year sentence for financial crimes. I had watched his trial from a distance, never once stepping foot inside the courthouse. But I had read every headline, every news article that chronicled his fall. The once great financial guru, now reduced to a cautionary tale, a fraudster whose own arrogance had been his undoing. His sentencing had come swift and brutal, and when the judge handed down the verdict, I imagined the exact moment it hit him when he realized this wasn't something he could talk his way out of, that his connections, his wealth, his carefully curated life had meant nothing in the eyes of the law. Vanessa had disappeared almost immediately. The moment the scandal broke, she had packed her bags and left town, running back to whatever hole she had crawled out of. No dramatic goodbyes, no standing by Elliot's side through his downfall. The woman he had risked everything for had abandoned him at the first sign of trouble. Fitting. And me? I had walked away from it all. The moment Elliot was convicted, I sold the house in Austin, packed up what little I cared to keep, and left Texas behind. The money from the lottery had never been about revenge. It had been about freedom, a fresh start, a life where I didn't have to measure my worth through someone else's eyes. I sipped my wine, letting the warmth spread through me, my fingers absent-mindedly tracing the gold bracelet on my wrist, a gift to myself, a reminder. Never again. My phone buzzed on the table beside me, pulling me from my thoughts. I glanced at the screen. Charlotte. I smiled, picking it up. You know, she said as soon as I answered. For someone who swore she wanted a quiet life, you've been making headlines again. I laughed softly. What now? The Monroe Foundation, she teased. People are talking. I leaned back in my chair, watching the waves roll in. The foundation had started as an idea, something small, something just for me. But it had grown into something bigger than I could have imagined. A place for women like me, women who had been trapped in marriages where money was used as a weapon, women who had been made to feel powerless. The foundation provided resources, financial education, legal aid, a way out for those who had been told there was none. It's working, Charlotte, I said, a quiet pride filling my chest. Women are getting the help they need. I know, she said warmly, and it's only going to get bigger. I let the words sink in, feeling the weight of them. A year ago, I had been a woman with no choices, no future beyond the life Elliot had dictated for me. And now, I was standing on my own, building something that mattered. A seagull cried in the distance, the wind carrying the sound through the open balcony doors. Charlotte sighed. I'll let you get back to your evening. But you should check your mail, I frowned. My mail? There was a pause. Something arrived for you today, from a federal prison in New Mexico. My grip on the phone tightened. Elliot. Charlotte didn't need to say his name. I already knew. My stomach twisted. A flood of old emotions rushing in, uninvited. Anger, pity, amusement. The curiosity was the worst of all. Do you want me to read it? Charlotte asked carefully. I swallowed, staring out at the endless horizon. Then I exhaled. No. Forward it to my office. I'll deal with it later. Another pause. Then, good choice. We said our goodbyes, and I set the phone down, my fingers tracing the rim of my glass. A letter from Elliot. I could imagine the words even without reading them. Regret. Apologies. Some new version of himself he had crafted behind bars, convinced he had changed. Maybe even a plea for help, some desperate attempt to claw his way back into a world that no longer belonged to him. I could read it. I could let his words sink in, let them pull at whatever remnants of our past still lingered in my mind. Or I could do what I had done the day he walked out of our marriage. I could let him go. With one last glance at the ocean, I stood and walked back inside, leaving the letter, and the past, right where it belonged. Elliot always thought he was untouchable, that he could lie, cheat, steal, and still come out on top. But in the end, he lost everything. His career, his money, his freedom, while I built a brand new life, better than he ever imagined. And if you take one thing from this story, let it be this. Never let anyone make you feel powerless. Learn your worth, take control, and when the time comes, fight back. If you loved this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more. And tell me in the comments, what would you have done in my place? If there's one thing I've learned, it's this: never let someone else control your future. In this country, power isn't just about money, it's about knowledge, independence, and knowing your worth. I spent years thinking love meant sacrifice, that loyalty meant staying silent. But silence lets people like Elliot win. Protect yourself. Know your finances, pay attention to red flags. And when someone shows you who they are, believe them. No one gets to write your story but you. And if you ever find yourself stuck, walk away. Fight back. Take control. Because freedom, that's the best revenge of all.